Hello, and welcome to True Audiophiles. So, this episode is hopefully one of the last that I do, or not like I don't have a choice, but hopefully the last one I do for a while in regards to this whole MoFi fiasco. And I'm not going to promote this as a mobile fidelity topic just because it's not just mobile fidelity, but it's just about audiophile releases in general. But I will heavily talk about mobile fidelity in this episode, and a big part of that reason is what I've been seeing on social media and YouTube. I guess that's social media kind of as well, but and that the big thing that I've been seeing lately is because of the revelation that mobile fidelity cuts from a DSD file, that they should now start charging less for their releases. The only thing I can possibly think of as to why this is even something that's being floated out there is that I guess some of these people think that Mobile Fidelity has been charging more for their product because they have been misleading people into believing that they are cutting from analog. I'm not sure I understand, because that's the only explanation I can think of, besides the potential fact that they just think that Mobile Fidelity needs to start charging less to gain customer loyalty back, I guess. I don't know. But I want to kind of sort of clear the air a little bit, and I'm hoping I can get some more information later and maybe do some more details in later episodes. But this is what I can tell you from my experiences and what I know and from what others that are in the industry have told me. So first things first is I've worked in a company that manufactures products, so I can also give you that perspective, as well as the fact that I've worked in a wholesale distribution company and retail. So I understand a lot of the pricing and how pricing is determined from every single aspect of it. So first thing is that I want to kind of talk about is to have people understand, and hopefully this helps you. And I hope this helps a lot of people out there in terms of better understanding the market and things on that nature. But anyways, the retail price is set based on the manufacturer anyways sets the retail price usually, and I'm not saying this is the case with Mobile Fidelity or Analog Productions or anybody, but generally speaking, that retail price is generally based on about 3 to 4 times the cost that it makes to manufacture each one of those products. So if said widget, let's make it easy, costs the company $25 to make, that's, when we're talking make, we're talking about, the materials costs involved in it. So that being said, if something costs the company $25, then they're going to charge either $75 or $100 for it. And you see this in the food industry as well. If you've ever watched any of those shows like Restaurant Impossible, for example, they talk about food costs all the time and how you want to stay under 33% or 30% food costs. And that's because of all the extra things involved in producing the product. So that's kind of the first step of this. So you have to understand that part of it. So having said that, I'm going to most specifically talk about one steps, mainly just because they're an easier one for me to know, have a better sense of where their costs are. Things like UHQR, I don't have a good understanding of, and I'll explain that in a second, but or maybe hopefully I will if I don't forget. But anyways, with one step, this is the one that I think most people have been referring to and thinking that they should charge, $60 or $75 and get rid of the box that they come in and just put them in a gatefold or something to that effect. But the thing that you need to understand is that process of the one step, that is a very expensive process to do. That specific step of doing the one step, and that is creating a lacquer for 500 to 1,000 copies of the record, because that's essentially what they do. For every 500 to 1,000 records they press, they need to make one set of lacquers for each one of those 500 to for every 500 to 1,000 copies. So that means on at least every one step that's come out so far, they've needed to create 4 lacquers to create 500 to 1,000 copies. So, when they first started, they did 2,500 copies of Abraxas. My understanding is they created 5 sets of lacquers to make those. And maybe they pressed a few more than 500 just so that they'd have extras, but that's basically what you're talking about. So they had to make 5 sets of lacquers or 20 lacquers to make those 2,500 copies of Abraxas. So not only do you have the materials involved in the lacquer, but you also have the labor, because you have to cut that lacquer real time. There's no shortcuts. So each one of those lacquers probably takes a minimum of, between setup and checking the lacquer, probably at least a half an hour minimum for each one of those lacquers that they need to make. So that's engineers' time that's being spent on that. So the one thing that I've seen quite a bit of, and that I can see their point, but is, and this is kind of going back more away from the one steps, but just in general, they've talked about how digital is cheaper to cut than analog. And depending on your process, that's true. If you're going by what the labels usually do, and that is they have this digital file that's already been created off of the master tape, they'll just take that file and email it to someone to, or send it, whatever they do, to cut to the vinyl. So there's no master tape involved, which means, because a master tape, you could have to do some other things like bake it to help preserve it a little bit, and make sure that all of your tape mechanism is aligned properly and set up properly. And there's some more labor-intensive things involved with creating the an analog copy, which could cost more money, absolutely. But I kind of thought of it this way, and this is probably a conservative view, but let's say they make 5,000 copies of an album, and they cut it from analog and they cut it from digital. Let's just say, for hypotheticals, which I think is an extreme, but let's say they have to pay $5,000 more to create that record from an analog source, which I think is probably not anywhere near accurate. I'm sure it's a lot less than that, but let's just say that. That's only $1 a record if they make 5,000 records. So even if you charge 4 times extra for 4 times what it costs you to make that, you're still only talking $4 more a record, tops. So that's not where the costs are going back into the one steps. In my opinion, there's 2 things that in my opinion, one of the things I think is probably one of the biggest factors, but another one is definitely truly a factor. And that is, the first one is cutting all those lacquers, because you need to cut a set of lacquers for every, like I said, for every 500 to 1,000 units. So the second part of that, which I know is not an opinion, it's a fact, that they have licensing fees that they have to pay out. And the licensing fees are typically based upon not only the popularity of the album that they're trying to reissue, but also how many they want to produce. So, in turn, I've heard that you can that these audiophile reissue labels can pay up to 6 figures for licensing fees for these reissues. So that's a huge chunk of money. So, that kind of explains a couple things, because I know some people say, why not just, because it's a digital copy, why not just press more of them? Because you have it as a digital copy, you don't need the analog anymore. Well, a big part of that is because of the licensing agreement, and so you can't just press more of them because the label will not allow it, because of the agreement has stated how many they can press in that agreement. So that's that part of it. So the bottom line is this, and I can, so you've got the license agreement, which is typically quite a bit of money. In this case, you also have the cost of creating all those lacquers. And even if they press 10,000, 20,000, or in the case of the Michael Jackson Thriller one step, 40,000, they still need to cut lacquers, a set of lacquers for every 500 to 1,000 of those that they make. So that is time and effort from the engineer, which is money, and then the cost of the lacquer, which is money. It's not as much, but it's still money. So, and then the replating, the process to press those one steps is going to be kind of redone every time for every 500 to 1,000. So I guess that I hope that explains it well for you. I mean, and I was going to talk about a little bit the UHQR series by Analog Productions, because they charge pretty much the same amount of money as a one-step, given, depending on the records that they produce, because most of them have been single records. There's been, I think the Aqualung was 2 LPs, if I'm not mistaken, but they're all in the $100 to $125 range. And I can't really better explain why they charge what they charge for theirs, because especially in the only ones that have been released so far, they have basically taken old stampers that they have, which the stampers are what are made to used to make the pressings of the records that were based off the lacquers. Analog Productions had bought the rights to all of the classic records, back catalog and back stampers that they have, or whatever they want to call them. So on all of the UHQRs, they have used those old pieces, the old hardware. So they're not doing a new cutting to create these new UHQRs. And even if they were to, they don't use the one-step process. So they don't need to make, if they were to cut a new lacquer, they're not going to be creating a lacquer for every 500 to 1,000 that they produce, because they aren't using that one-step process. When they do the standard usual process, which I think is 4 or 5 steps, you really don't need to make, for the amount of records that UHQRs are being made in, and the quantities they're being made in, you shouldn't need to make probably more than 1 lacquer, maybe 2 sets of lacquers, I should say. And that's it. Even if they're doing 25,000 or whatever they made for the Jimi Hendrix. So that cost is not there in the UHQRs. Now, maybe they're spending more time QCing the product, and maybe they're spending more money on the boxes that they are in, which is definitely possible. I'm not sure. They might be spending more time and more money on the QCing, but they also own the pressing plant, which Mobile Fidelity doesn't, at least right at this moment. So some of those costs to do the quality control are less than what Mobile Fidelity would have to pay to get the same kind of quality control. So, and I'm not knocking Analog Productions or the UHQR series, because I've got 4 of them and I think they sound great, but I'm not sure I understand where the costs to make those are coming from, because I can't imagine that the vinyl material that they use is much, if any, more than the super vinyl that's being used on Mobile Fidelities. The packaging probably is a little bit more expensive, maybe, not sure, but it can't be that much more expensive. So the only other thing I could think of is the quality control aspect of it, and that they're spending more money on that. But if they aren't listening to a lot of them. And I will say that at least my first two, the first two that were ever created, which is the Jimi Hendrix Axis Bold as Love, mine both have more surface noise than I think a $100 record should have had. So they still sound phenomenal except for that aspect of it. But anyway, that's kind of a little bit off topic, but I hope that explains even why standard analog, I'm sorry, not analog, standard audiophile releases cost more than a regular label reissue. Like, for example, the Tone Poets, although they're getting close, they're a little bit less than what Mobile Fidelity and Analog Productions charge for their reissues. And a big part of that is because the label is actually doing the release of this, which means they don't have to pay those really expensive licensing arrangements and licensing deals. So that cost is out of the equation. So that's how they can do it. But I hope that helps answer some questions for you, and I hope that explains it well for you. I would love to hear your comments below, and, especially if you have any other questions in regards to this topic at hand. I may not know the answers, but I can certainly see what I can do to find out about those. The one other thing that I also want to make mention of is one thing I didn't mention is that on the one steps and any other previous reissues that have been transferred to digital from the master tapes from MoFi is the cost of flying the engineer and the equipment out to do those transfers. It's certainly not super expensive, but it's not cheap either, especially if something goes wrong and that the equipment gets damaged. It has to be repaired before they can make those copies. And I know that's happened once before, at least. So that cost is also has to be added into the mobile fidelity cost of doing business, because they don't just get digital high-res files sent to them to make copies of when they record from digital. They make their own digital copies, and that I have confirmed with a few people already that is definitely what they do on these reissues. They don't rely on other people's digital transfers, so they have to pay for that option to fly people out and cut and make digital copies. So anyway, so that is everything. I promise this time. I don't think I've forgotten anything else, but I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you liked what you saw here, hit that like button. If you want to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to know when my new videos come out, hit that alert bell. And also check me out on social media. I have got a Facebook group called True Audiophiles that's out there. I have a link below for that. And I'm also on Twitter and on Instagram as well. So check me out there if you want. I'd love to hear from you. I appreciate the feedback and even the constructive criticism, as long as we stay respectful. And I think that is everything I have for today. Thank you very much, and you have a great one.